Kremlin is lashing out at the U.S. and our allies after President Biden gave Ukraine the go-ahead to fire the long-range missile that we've provided deep into Russia. The missiles are targeting Russian military sites that are used by Russia to savagely attack our ally Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin with this warning about the use of those missiles.
We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities. I recommend that the ruling elites of those countries that are hatching plans to use their military contingents against Russia seriously think about this.
You know, I think that people in America need to come to the understanding that the majority of politicians on the left and on the right, Republicans and Democrats, the majority of these politicians want war. They have been wanting to escalate this war between Russia and Ukraine for a very long time. Now, that's not to say every politician feels this way. And of course, I know that Trump has talked about ending this war one way or the other. And I know that us regular people, we all have our own opinions. But I think us regular people need to stop being so divided, and we need to start being more vocal about how we do not want World War III. Because listen, I don't care if you voted for Kamala or you voted for Trump. I don't care how you feel about this or how you feel about that. At the end of the day, if there is at least one thing that most of us should be able to agree upon, and I know we cannot agree upon almost anything out there, but if there is one thing left on earth that we can agree upon, it's that we probably don't want to be eviscerated by a nuclear bomb. I don't want that. I don't think the majority of you all want that. And regardless of what people believe in and what their ideology is and who they vote for, I don't think that they want World War III either. So if we, everyday, regular, average Americans can come together and come to the understanding that the politicians that represent us on both sides of the aisle are walking us straight into nuclear Armageddon, I feel like more people would then feel okay to speak out about this right now. Because they want us divided into these little political groups to where even though maybe you're against war, even though maybe you don't want to be blown up by a nuclear bomb, you're kind of afraid to say so because you don't want to go against your tribe. So they want us everyday common people to be tribal in nature, right? And they want us to be against each other. But on many issues in Washington, D.C., these politicians are on the same page. Do not let them fool you. And they're on the same page, most of them, when it comes to World War III and the war in Ukraine and Israel and you name it. And the reality of the situation that we're dealing with right now is that we have an 82-year-old man with just a few weeks left in office walking us directly into World War III because he obviously does not care too much about the future. Because he's not going to be president anymore in the near future. And just to be real, he probably doesn't have that long left on earth. He's an 82-year-old man. And I would be extremely lucky to make it to that age. And I wish Joe Biden nothing but the best of health. But we have to be bluntly honest about what's going on here. We have an old man that's on his way out of the door, who is sparking off World War III on his way out. And is this what you want your legacy to be? Is this what you want to be remembered by? The guy who sparked World War III on your way out of the White House? Literally, as you're walking out the doors, you set the entire world on fire? That's your legacy? And, you know, him giving Ukraine the go-ahead to use these long-range weapons right now, just right before he gets out of office, so he doesn't have to deal with what comes next. It's really disgusting to me. And I want to be clear here. No one is saying that Ukraine cannot defend itself. Because that's the argument a lot of people like to bring up. If America was invaded, hell yeah, we would defend ourselves. And I don't think most people have a problem with Ukraine defending itself. If Ukraine wanted to defend itself with its own weapons, it wouldn't be an issue. The problem is Ukraine is defending itself with our weapons provided by us. And these long-range missiles that we gave them, they can't use these weapons without our direct involvement. So if Ukraine had their own long-range missiles and they wanted to do whatever long-range nonsense they wanted to do, you wouldn't hear from me or most people about this problem, and it wouldn't be leading us into World War III. The reason this is a problem is because these weapons are provided by us. And they cannot use them without us, without our direct involvement in this conflict. And now, the UK and other countries in NATO, they're stepping in. France has given them the go-ahead to use some of their weapons that they have to use with the direct involvement of France. So understand here, folks, no one is saying that Ukraine cannot defend itself from invasion. People have a problem that they're using our weapons, using our direct involvement, dragging us further into this conflict. And you can be as sympathetic as you want to be with Ukraine and what they're going through. You have to ask yourself the question, is it really worth it? Is Ukraine worth the possible end of the world, at least as we know it? Do you want to send your kids, your grandkids, your loved ones to die for Ukraine? And if it really gets bad, like it probably would, we don't even have to worry about this conversation because half the world will be gone. So that's what we're looking at here. Nuclear Armageddon over Ukraine. It's not worth it to me. But let's go ahead and roll this clip, and then I'll be right back with more thoughts.
Military intelligence analyst, former Defense Intelligence Agency official, joins us now. Rebecca, always good to see you. You know, many say President Biden should have given the green light to use these long-range missiles long before to push Putin back and help Ukraine. What do you think will happen now that Ukraine is using them and Putin retaliated, in a sense, by using this new hypersonic missile?
So we war gamed this scenario, exactly this scenario back in the intelligence community. And we are right now on the escalation ladder, inching towards a nuclear war. It's not going to happen today or tomorrow, but the way that it happens, Eric, the Russians and the United States are de facto right now in a war. Why is that? It is because those attackers don't fire by themselves, even though Ukrainian soldier technically can push the button, but the targeting of the weapon systems, ensuring that there's a proper flight trajectory of the missile, that it destroys the right target, the actual battle damage achieved that we wanted to achieve, it all requires U.S. personnel and U.S. satellites. This is why the Russians have stated that the United States and European targets are now in crosshairs. And every war game that we conducted back in the intelligence community ended up in a nuclear war. There was an escalation ladder, and the Russians have mapped that out in the course of 20 years, and we're on it right now.
Well, some supporters say, you know, Ukraine has the right to defend itself, that it's just targeting Russian military sites that are attacking Ukraine, and this is perfectly legal and appropriate under international law.
absolutely, from the standpoint of the laws of conflict, Ukraine is entitled to its defense, and this is what the United States has been doing. But there's a rational approach, and then there's an irrational, a senseless one. And President Biden himself, just 2 years, he told his DNC donors at the fundraising event in New York, he explained that the reason why he was not providing those strategic missile systems at the time in quantities and needed for Ukraine to actually make a difference on the battlefield is to prevent World War III. Biden also said that the threat of nuclear Armageddon is real. And so what he has done is a 180. So it's unclear right now why he's doing it, but whether he's trying to walk us into this war, yes, absolutely. There's a difference between the right and between the actual reality. And the reality that we are in, we are inching very steadily to the unthinkable that was gamed out by the U.S. intelligence community, and the U.S. intelligence community as recently as September advised President Biden against providing the ATACMS because Putin would likely retaliate, including with lethal means, against the United States and against Europe, saying nothing about Ukraine. Ukraine is being destroyed right now.
Well, at the same time, they've been holding back Russia. He's taken about 18% of the territory. Finally, in terms of Russia, I mean, Putin's had to rely on Kim Jong-un and get 10,000 North Korean soldiers. Now there are reports he's relying on the Houthis. I mean, some say the Russian army has been decimated. They've had hundreds of thousands of losses that without a loss of an American life, the Allies have basically whittled down and practically destroyed the Russian army.
So I respectfully disagree with this characterization, Eric. You know, I'm a former intelligence officer. My intelligence assessment, and it is shared by multiple experts, is that no, the Russian army has not been decimated. In fact, the Russian army, from the standpoint of combat potential, which is calculated by a combination of weapon systems, armed forces, the capacity of military-industrial complex to reproduce, to scale up, and defense economics, Ukraine is massively outgunned and outmanned. The Russian military-industrial complex is right now working on a 24/7 basis, 3 shifts a day, pumping out those missile systems. Why is that? It's because Putin has transitioned the Russian military and economy on a wartime footing 7 years prior to invading Ukraine. And I personally briefed NATO, Obama's White House, National Security Council, STRATCOM, EUCOM, and all of these key pieces of the U.S. national security community about what was coming, right, at the highly classified level. And yet, what the Pentagon has decided to do is use Ukraine effectively as a human shield to protect the Europeans who didn't want to pay for their own security.
And finally, quickly, it seems like a standoff. How do you think this will end? What do you see happening in the next year?
Well, hopefully, President Trump will come in and settle this. He is the only president that Putin fears, the only U.S. president, for multiple reasons. And one of them is the Russian intelligence designated Trump as unpredictable, which means that when Trump negotiates, the Russians will not be able to tell whether he's bluffing or not, because the Russians are in excellent position to negotiate, the Ukrainians are not. But we have 60 days still when Biden, has his finger on the nuclear button, and Biden, multiple experts designated him as cognitively impaired. So we're in a very perilous situation.
Well, that's not exactly fair to say that, and others say that he's been able to maneuver this appropriately without a loss of American life. We'll see what happens.
At first I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about that lady, but I think I might kind of like her because she brings up a point that I've brought up many times in the past, and that is it doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter what your opinion on this conflict is It doesn't matter what your stance is. What matters is the reality of what could happen here. Because you could be pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, you could be pro-war, anti-war. It doesn't really matter. You could be, the number one supporter of Ukraine, but still we have to accept the reality of, if we continue to provide Ukraine these type of weapons to help them defend themselves or whatever they're doing, then the reality is that only more lives are going to get lost. More countries are going to get dragged into this conflict. And when you have nuclear superpowers fighting each other and neither side wants to back down, then it's ultimately going to lead to some buttons getting pressed and half of humanity being wiped off the planet of the earth. So that's the reality that we are facing. And it doesn't matter if you're the number one pro-Ukraine or you're anti-Ukraine. It all leads to the same outcome. And all this talk about the Russian army being decimated, all of that is pure propaganda. They've been spewing that nonsense for the last couple of years. If anything, Russian forces are now more battle-hardened and they have battlefield experience. So let's say you take some troops from America. I'm not talking our most, highly trained special forces, but let's say you take some of your kids that are in the military who have no fighting experience, no battleground experience. Hell, they've probably never been outside of America before. And you go drop them off in the trenches of Ukraine and Russia. Who do you think is going to have the advantage on the battlefield? The people who know the area, know the terrain, who have been fighting, or the people who have been at home, eating Debbie cakes, playing video games, living a cozy American lifestyle. And that's not to say that we don't have any hardcore fighters in the American military. That's not what I'm trying to say at all here. But there's an advantage to having soldiers that have that experience on the ground. They've already seen death. They've already had the bullets whizzing by their head and the bombs dropping. They've already seen it, experienced it. It doesn't even faze some of them anymore. So there's a clear advantage when you have troops that have been through something going against troops who have lived a cozy lifestyle and have never had to fight for anything a day in their life. But also, it's just, they keep pushing out this narrative that is obviously not true. You can look at that weapon, that experimental missile, ICBM, whatever you want to call it, that Russia dropped on Ukraine a few days ago. And that right there tells you that if Russia wanted to, it could have decimated Ukraine entirely by now. It could have turned the entire Ukraine into rubble by now. They have the firepower to do it. They have the ability to do that. But they haven't. Now, I'm not saying, oh my God, we should praise Russia for showing restraint. That's not what I'm saying. But if Putin really had the goals that they claim he has, then he's obviously not showing it. Because we know that they have the ability to do way more damage, but they're not. So I think that says a lot. Because we could listen to words all day long, let's pay attention to the actions. And the actions of the Russian army right now doesn't show me that, they have ambitions that are larger than a few regions in Ukraine. It doesn't look like they want to take over all of Ukraine to me. And it damn sure doesn't look like they want to go any further. Now, could that change? Could I be wrong? I'm open to all possibilities. And when this conflict initially started, I was worried that Putin was going to blitzkrieg straight through and just go to Poland and who knows where he would go next. But that doesn't appear like that's what he wants. And right now, regardless of what Putin wants or not, I know what I want. And I want to live. I want to have a bright future. I want you all to live and have bright futures. I want you all to raise your kids and your kids raise their kids in a prosperous country without any of these massive conflicts to worry about. That's what I want. And if we further escalate this war, we're not going to have that future. So, regardless of how you feel about Ukraine right now, I think it's time that we come to some sort of understanding about what's going on here, and we figure out where our priorities lie and what is really worth it to you. So for now, you let me know what you think down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe, ring that notification bell, and I'll talk to you all very soon in the next video.